well, thanks everyone for joining today. So many of you probably know we've done several sessions about fees, both determining what our fees should be for different phases of different kinds of projects, negotiating those fees with the client. But we haven't really talked yet about what do you do when your fee is actually set, and like how do you make sure you start off on the right foot, you stay on track, and course correct if you need to along the way. So we've organized the conversation here today with Matt LaRue from HMFH. Teresa, I'll hand it over to you to introduce him.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad everyone can join us. And again, thanks, Rosalind, for the description. We're really excited about this session today. And as Rosalind mentioned, we have Matt LaRue with us from HMFH, a fellow colleague, and he is the associate principal with the company. And he is going to just talk a little bit about himself. And then we're going to direct it back to Rosalind, and she has some really great questions for us today that we're going to be getting engaged on. So again, please feel free to engage. It's a very informal session. We welcome your input. So with that, Matt, let's turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Rosalind. I'm happy to be here, happy to share whatever experiences I can with people. And I'm excited to hear other people's experiences and maybe learn some things myself. So as Tracy mentioned, I'm an associate principal at HMFH Architects. We're based in Cambridge, and we do a lot of focus on educational design. So we're working in the K-12 field a lot, some higher ed, a lot of it's public work. And I've been with HMFH for 14 years. And HMFH is what I consider to be a mid-size architecture firm. We're about 50 people. We can range up to 60, 65 when we're particularly busy. And previously I worked in a small firm where I was doing a lot of everything. So I can kind of bring my experience from those two ranges. I had worked in some large firms, but those were early in my career, and I didn't have as much exposure to things like fee management there. So I hopefully can think through what it's like to work in a range of different size firms.
Thank you. Excuse me. I have a bit of a cold, everyone, so bear with me a little bit. Yeah, and one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do this topic too, I'll add, is I feel like managing the fee is one of arguably one of the most important responsibilities of the project manager, and something that I feel like we don't get a lot of direct instruction on how to do, or best practices and things like that. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot from the discussion today. So to start off, let's talk about when you start a project, right, or a phase of a project, and how you staff it can definitely make a big impact on your burn rate, right? And it seems like there's definitely a careful balance to strike between senior staff, who obviously can work more efficiently and independently, versus more junior staff who need more guidance, more supervision, but are less expensive, right, to the project. So Matt, I'm curious what you think about when you're formulating the team or deciding who's going to work on which phases. Do you think about the different phases a little bit differently? And yeah, I'm just curious what your kind of thought process is there.
Yeah, I would first say that staffing and fee management of projects is not a science. The way I think about it, it's a lot like the design practice of architecture. It's how do you synthesize a host of considerations and then hopefully come up with a solution that's not the one right solution, but a hopefully elegant solution to your project's needs. And you do have to look at experience and pay rates. And so ideally, a project, a classic's whole life would have a really good balance between experienced staff and junior staff. And I think in a lot of our projects that start off with a feasibility study, we're pretty small. And so you might try to pair a really senior person with a really junior person, where the junior person could do a lot of the production, but also treat it kind of as a mentoring opportunity where they're getting a lot of experience really quickly across the whole kind of range of tasks on the project. And then from there, you want to kind of staff up, finding out who has particular skill sets that lend itself to the needs of a project. And of course, the big question is always going to be who's available. And so you're kind of starting with that pool of people and then figuring out what's the mix. I also think it's important to consider how chemistry factors into a project team, because a dysfunctional project team can burn through fee pretty quickly. So you want to try to think about who's got personalities and approaches that complement each other on the project.
Yeah, that's a good point. It also makes me think of something I think we've seen in our office that ties into how making sure everyone's clear on their roles too. Sometimes I've seen burn through fee much more quickly if people are kind of overlapping tasks, or it's not exactly clear who's responsible for what. You talking about chemistry between people, it made me think of that.
Yeah, when we start out, we will lay out a labor budget for a project, and we kind of list out the roles that we will need in each phase of the project, and then making sure that the people understand where they fit into that spreadsheet.
Yeah, makes sense. So next,
Spreadsheet's really great.
oh, sorry.
The spreadsheet's really great because it also gives accounting a chance to look at the different phases and what the timelines are and who's working on what, not only from an accounting standpoint, but also for a timesheet standpoint. So we understand what team members are working on what project. And it's really an awesome tool to just, even not being a project manager, just being able to see all the projects and how they're laid out.
Yeah, so I guess also maybe helpful context for everyone on the call. Tracy is also from HMFH and is account manager. So not necessarily like architect, but like definitely looking at all the financial side of things, right? So thanks for weighing in, Tracy. And I know you have some thoughts on this next one too. So thinking about once you're kind of up and going on the project, wondering, is it better to, especially as you get going through the phases, do you find it better to look at your performance just by phase, kind of specifically broken out, or kind of holistically? And that matters more and more as you get further along the project, right? Depending on what the performance has been on previous phases. And like I've seen this done both ways, and maybe the answer is that you got to kind of look at both all the time. But yeah, I'm curious how you guys go about it. And Tracy, if you've seen different project managers do it different ways, and
I'm happy to talk about that. So for us, it really depends on the project, but for the majority of our projects, we do look at the, especially from an accounting standpoint, we look at it as a phase by phase. I typically enter the budget based on what the project manager has given me, and we try to make sure that it matches up with the timeline. We do a preliminary cash flow that the client can have access to. And again, it gives a good indication of who's working on what phase as well. And we typically look at everything on, we have project/monthly billing meetings. So what I will do is we'll pull up different reports which includes all the staff that worked on the project that month. So the project manager can take a look and see how many hours each person put in, which is also a good indication to, you want to check to see what months have 4 weeks against what months have 5 weeks, because that can kind of throw things off a little bit. But what I typically do is look at what was budgeted versus what was actually used. So we look at hours and dollars at the same time. So the project manager really has a good understanding of, once the cash flow has been laid out, and we look at, okay, well, this is what we're going to be billing for this month on this phase. Then we can see, we'll have a really good indication of how we're doing for that phase. And then, of course, as we progress and we feel that, you know, certain months need to be extended a little bit, you know, because we're not quite there yet, or the client needs for us to work a little bit more, we have a discussion at that time as to what we're going to be billing, and what staff and how's everything going to be looked at moving forward. So I can also speak from, this is another topic that we've come up with, is for additional services on the project. This is also looked at on a monthly basis, because obviously if you're looking at phases on a project and you're looking at additional services, sometimes those additional services can be billed with the phase, and sometimes they can be billed on a time and material basis. So again, it depends on where we are at that point, where the timeline is. And but the only time I see that we don't have a typical phase by phase is what Matt was talking about earlier, is that we have like a feasibility study. We know there's a study on a project that's really a small contract at that point. But again, everything is done on a monthly basis, so we have a really good indication as to how the project is doing.
Yeah, the monthly is important because that's the cycle in which we bill our clients. So that's the kind of what you want to be doing, is checking at that same cycle. So it allows you an opportunity to make adjustments if you have to, as the project's proceeding through its phases. Sometimes you make decisions to move budgeted hours from one phase to another, to kind of adjust how that's going. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Thanks. And I'll pause here too and see if anyone in the audience have any thoughts or questions that are coming up for you before I move on to the next thing.
I don't know if it's quite related, but I'm not actually an architect, I'm a consultant. So on the consultant side, how much of that, you know, I've obviously worked with architects enough, but how much of a sub-consultant fee like that you allot can be used for labor, and, you know, vice versa? Like, does it all come from the same bucket?
No, I think it's important to separate out your internal labor budget from your consultants. And so what we typically do is we'll get all the proposals in from the consultants, we'll plug them into their own section of the budget. And you understand what proportion of the overall fee that will take up. And then, you know, that tells you what your target, what your target fee is and what the consultants are using up. That's the kind of bucket that you have to work with for your internal labor.
Gotcha. Nice.
I would have a question too. My name is Brigitte Staines, Inkstone Architects. We are a smaller office, so we are only 10 people, and our biggest struggle is to keep the control, since we don't have someone dedicated doing we do have an accountant, but not really per se going over smaller projects, to keep that in check and not going overboard with design or anything. So I was wondering if someone in the group has advice for that, how to do it. I try to do the monthly thing because I think this is super important to be in control, but it's sometimes really, really hard to be on this monthly billing cycle with some projects.
Yeah, I know in our office, and we're kind of like, we've gotten a little bigger, but previous years have been on this a little bit smaller side too. And something we've kind of grown into that, I mean, also maybe at 10 people is tough, but like they said, on the monthly cycle, but having each PM kind of do it themselves and like report back to you almost, right? Like they're responsible for kind of doing that projection to see how much fee is left, but based on your planned staffing, how much fee are you going to use up? And what does that look, right? Like sometimes you've got to hold people a little accountable to do that math, right? And
Yeah,
say like, ooh, we're not tracking so well, right?
yeah,
I don't know. That's something that comes to mind to me. I don't know if other people.
yeah. Reeling in the project managers more is probably
Yeah,
what we need to do in the future. So
yeah,
that's right. So far, it runs mostly through my desk, and that's a lot to keep under control.
yeah,
Yeah, thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I
and
mean, we're running businesses, and businesses really rely upon getting paid on time. So you want to make sure that you're getting your invoices out to your clients on a regular basis. And then your consultants are all going to want to get paid on a predictable time frame too. So I get it. I worked for a firm where, you know, a lot of the time it was like 3 or 4 of us, and you had to do everything, and it's hard to find the time to do that. But you know, it's up there on the list of important things that the project manager has to do.
Right. Thank you.
I just wanted to say too, though, and to touch upon what Brian was talking about is when we do break our projects out by phase, we also break our consultants out by phase. So we don't look at the consultant as one lump sum. We look at it that the scope of services they're going to be doing in that phase. So that way it's easy for us to keep track of the hours that we spend and also the time and the invoices that the consultants have spent on the project as well. So the phase by phase really helps in that instance.
I also do want to just address one other point Tracy made, where we look at on the monthly basis how we're doing with hours and dollars. And you might be way over on your hours, but your dollars are okay because of the pay rates and the combination of the people you have on the team. And it's important to know how you are doing on your hours, but in the end, for me, I just look at the dollars.
I was kind of thinking the same. That like maybe it's helpful to know the hours, but yeah, the dollars are probably more important. The bottom line, right? They're the bottom line.
Right.
So the next thing I was going to ask, and I probably a lot of people have experienced this when, you know, a firm very intentionally, strategically decides to do a project that they acknowledge they may not be particularly profitable on, right? Like you make those strategic decisions to do a project to build a certain client relationship or build, you know, create a new client relationship or expand into a new sector, do a different project type, or whatever. You're just deciding to go in the extra mile to kind of prove your firm's abilities, or there's some kind of technology or process learning curve that you're implementing. And, you know, I think often there is some level of acknowledgement that like, okay, we may not be like turning a great profit on this, but I'm curious if you at HMFH or if you've seen anyone else anywhere or anyone else on this call, if anyone like intentionally kind of sets a new goal for the like how much, if you kind of realize you're going to go over, but like do you set a new bar of like, okay, well we're going to go over, but we don't want to go over too much, or you know, and who's involved in that conversation, what you think about in that process.
Yeah, we always set a goal for a project and then fight to meet that goal, at least meet it. But that goal could vary. You know, we have a kind of standard in our office that our projects all try to hit, but these are business decisions that you have to make. Even if you're talking about, you know, not meeting your regular profit or doing pro bono work, it's like those are still business decisions, and it should be wrapped up in really the mission of your firm, right? It should tie back to that. What are you getting out of doing this? And so because it is a business decision, I would want to make sure that it involves all the partners who have a stake in the firm, especially if it's a matter of taking a lower profit or even a loss on the project. So I don't know how other people have experience with that. That's how we've done it.
That makes sense. Those are some good thoughts. And I'm curious also if anyone makes me wonder, in some cases, you know, firm ownership is distributed amongst many shareholders, right? More of an employee-owned business model. I'm curious if anyone on the call, or I don't know if HMFH is structured that way, or if anyone else on the call is at a firm that's like that, and I don't know, has been part of any of those kind of conversations.
I think one of the things I've seen too is that if we do a project on a smaller scale, and we work with a certain client, you know, it's like Matt said, we work with a lot of schools, you know, that superintendent can move off to another school project and they'll have remembered us helping them out with their previous scope, and that puts us in a really good favor, so to speak, especially if we've done a really good job, which we always do. But I think you have to look at it too, is that people move on, and if they do and they remember the work that you did for them, that helps from a business standpoint as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I know there's always like I feel like this goes into which we've talked about before, but the ad service strategy too, of like, when do you actually ask for an ad service, and when do you just say like, we're doing this what's the expression, like in good faith, sort of like, we're going to take good care of you, so we hope someday you take good care of us, kind of good relationship building.
Yeah, if we have a good relationship and the client has not, you know, lowballed us on the fee, and we think that we have a, you know, comfortable way to work, we sometimes would look at what might be justified as an additional service and ask ourselves, is it worth, you know, going to them for this? Is it, you know, small and it's more effort to actually fight to get it than it is to just figure it into a contingency that we hopefully have carried within a fee.
Right. Sense. Excuse me. All right. So next I want to kind of go into like when you do, so you know, you have your best laid plans, you're on track for a while, and then something comes up, you run into some kind of hiccup. The schedule extends, or there's some kind of staffing change. I'm curious if you have any particular levers that you pull to kind of try and rein things back in or get back on track. And Tracy, I'm curious if you've seen other project managers with different strategies. But Matt, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. Well, it kind of, the first thing you want to ask goes back to what we were just talking about. Is the reason for this hiccup not due to any fault of our own? And if it's not, then is it reasonable to ask for additional services from the owner? We have a project right now that its construction schedule completion date has gotten pushed out a couple of times and had nothing to do with our performance on it. And you know, we've had to, the first time we asked the owner for more money, and because we had to stay on the project, we had to keep it staffed. And they gave us additional services, and we're kind of at that point again. I think we're going to do that. It's clear that they're not going to meet the schedule. Okay. So that you always want to make sure that you're not leaving anything on the table, that you're justified in getting extra payment for. if it's totally an internally issue, then it's, how do you triage and make sure that you can stick to a budget, or at least minimize the damage. So it might be moving people on or off our team. And sometimes we've said, okay, we're not going to bill anymore for this phase. Nobody on the team is allowed to put anything on their timesheet after this date. And that, in a way, helps send the message to the team that, we have to be efficient. We have to make sure that we're just doing absolutely what we need to do, a little more. So that's, I think, an important way to manage a budget.
Thank you. Curious, I'm going to open it up again to people on the call. If anyone else have any thoughts here or on the last couple topics?
So what I've noticed as, I'm tracking budgets, I noticed that, if it starts to go over, you start to look at what additional stuff got put in, because like scope creep happens. It's kind of natural, and you want to do everything that you can for your client, and but eventually, if it gets overboard, what I found really helpful is because we obviously do time cards and have descriptions of everything you write there. Because I had some younger staff that would put descriptions, and I go back and I'm like, what do you do? Because I'm trying to pick out all that extra scope creep that happened and lump it into additional services essentially. So just, I guess, making sure, especially your younger staff, because they might not be as efficient in doing new stuff. That anyway, they just keeping close tabs on what you're doing for that work, like each hour.
Yeah, we have for certain projects for us, we've set it up so that you're like required to enter comments when you put time to something, and it is helpful when you go back see like what were we doing 3 months ago for it's also just no one remembers, right? And what else someone has recommended in our office that I haven't actually done but I think is a great idea is, especially when there's like scope creep or like those little things that come up along the way that are never on their own worth a request for an ad service, is like kind of keeping an ongoing list of them, and potentially even like sharing it with the client on a weekly or monthly basis or something, along with other updates. Maybe it's like a list of open items, things to follow up on, and like these are the things we've kind of done that are sort of outside of our scope, but we're not, just kind of keeping tabs on it. Again, I haven't actually done it, but I like the idea of it.
Because I'm sure as architects, you guys cover a much wider net than I'm a geotechnical consultant, so we're pretty focused. But architects cover a lot of different, broader scope, I guess. So probably, much more applicable to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rosalind, I like that idea of keeping a tracking list that you then do share with the client. We have done that. And I think it's really helpful because inevitably there will be some points of, conflict or disagreement later on in a project. They may feel that we owe them something, or that, maybe there's a big change order or something and we have to do extra work. So the more that they're aware of the things that we've already done in good faith to them, the more leverage you have in those more difficult situations later.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Can I offer a comment on that?
Yeah.
So this is Chris Milford. I'm both an architect and more recently been working as an OPM. I think it's incredibly valuable to include, when you're doing invoicing, those things that you are doing additional services on that you're not charging for. First, it makes the owner feel good, right? They did clearly additional stuff, not just, additional hours on something that's in the scope and you have to parse out what's reasonable. But putting it on the invoice as, provided without billing, or however you want to put it, gives them a record of the effort that you're putting in for smaller things. And when you get to that item that you really do need to go after additional services for, they have a better sense of what they're being charged about, that they're not being nickel and dimed. They're getting the the best services they can from you, but they also are clearly being presented with, this is outside of the scope we agreed to. And part of our agreement is when we reach that point, it's appropriate for us to reach out to you for additional services. Or we can not take on those additional services. It's up to you.
Yeah, that's a great point. That invoicing cycle is a good timing to do that. Maybe it's not weekly, it's on that invoicing cycle, right? Like a little kind of report almost from us of like, these are the little things that have been going on, and that's a good point.
Otherwise, it's completely opaque to the client. They just get the invoice every month, and then when you go looking for an additional service, it's, in their eyes out of the blue, or aren't they making enough money, or whatever else it is.
Right.
I can kind of speak a little bit about that as well, in that for additional services, on our end, when the project managers are doing a proposal letter, they make it really clear what's included and what's not included, so that the OPM and the owner have a clear understanding as to what might potentially become additional services. And also, our consultants are really clear as to the scope of services. And as we know with geotech and geoenvironmental, until you start digging, you really don't know what kind of projects what kind of issues can come up. So again, I think communication is really key, as you mentioned, Chris, not just on paper, but in verbal communication as well, and email, just to make sure that the OPM and the client are fully aware of the process. I know that for when we invoice, we have different types of invoicing formats. So we always have basic services, and we have, for additional services, we have lump sum and not to exceed, and time and material where it fits and what we've been approved for. So I think what you said makes a really good point. And, just so you know that we try to make it a point of being really clear in our contracts and proposals as to what is considered basic services, and also looking at the RFS is really important too when we do that, so that we understand what's being expected of us at the same time.
Yeah, and I know certain clients like DCAM, like the RFS becomes part of the contract, right? Like you are held to everything in that document. And I don't know, in a challenging way, they're pretty good at using some pretty open-ended language. Which is a good segue perhaps to one of my last topics here is like managing your fee when it's like prefixed, non-negotiable, you didn't get to decide it. Things like studies on some of these public projects. I at least personally have found that for sure that is a challenging situation. And yeah, I'm curious, Matt, if you have any thoughts on this, or again, anyone else on the call too, of like strategies to really optimize that fee. And yeah, again, it's hard because I find the RFPs are written in a way that are very open-ended and can kind of cast a wide swath of things for you to look at and things that you need to deliver to them during that study process. So yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts or words of advice there.
Yeah, we run into a lot of these kinds of contracts on our public school projects where a feasibility study has to be done, and then may go into schematic design before the budget is set for the project. And also, oftentimes on these public projects, that budget then needs to be approved through a referendum by voters. And so the municipality may not be willing to put a lot of money up front to pay, the kind of fee that should be paid for the amount of work that's required in a feasibility study or schematic design. And so again, it's a business decision that we would have to make and look at it and say, okay, there's no way we can actually make a profit for the amount of fee that they say they have available. But we know that there's a project after that. And we might have a good sense of what the fee for that whole project will be. And we know it's going to make up for the loss that would happen on the front end. So it's a bit of like a risk decision, because if the vote fails, we're stuck, you know. And so we often make decisions about the projects that we'll go after based upon the likelihood of a project passing, or the kind of difficulties that we can tell through our research or knowledge of a project beforehand. And we would go into it saying, okay, we'll go after this project knowing that we'll get a low fee, but we're pretty confident that it's a good project, and the town is put together a good building committee, and there's support in the town, and we know that we'll get past it and be able to make up for our low fee for them later. Ideally, that wouldn't happen, and you wouldn't have to play that risk game, but that's kind of the field that we happen to be in, and I don't know if other firms find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, I feel like that's similar, sounds similar to our experience, but yeah, I'm curious if anyone else here has any thoughts on that as well. See if anyone unmutes here. Let's see.
I just have more of a question than a comment. So with the feasibility stage, because I've been involved in a few school projects, kind of most of my bigger projects. So I understand like where the set budgeting comes from with approval and all that. I didn't realize that the feasibility was actually separate. If you do the feasibility stage, is there like a much higher win rate for the construction phase, or do they still, or does the school still shop around, or the school district still, do they still shop around after, or do you have an advantage doing the feasibility stage?
In Massachusetts, I think our experience has been, it's been pretty consistent. So you'd start at feasibility unless you really screw things up. There's a bad chemistry with the owner that you would continue on through the rest of it. We do work in New Hampshire and Rhode Island too.
Yeah.
In Rhode Island in particular, they officially re-advertise at the next stage, no matter if they want to keep you or not. And so there's always that possibility you wouldn't get reselected. But if you've generally nurtured a good relationship, then they would reselect you.
Yeah, I've worked mostly in Massachusetts, so I didn't know if the architect I was working with was just really good and got both, or they just, or what you said, this just continuity kind of thing. I mean, they were good architects, not gonna lie, but yeah.
Yeah, I think with DCAM too, you usually, if you're doing the study, you go on and do design as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna get a quick plug in. I don't work with them anymore because I'm a geopeer, but Terracon Consultants, phenomenal geotechs, a lot of experience on school projects.
Right.
Sorry, just good friends. Gotta give them a shout out.
Yeah. All right. Any other, well, actually I have one kind of like concluding, we're kind of getting to the end of my questions actually, we're a little ahead of schedule here, so certainly if anyone has anything else they want to chime in with, but my kind of last question for Matt is, any kind of broad takeaways, or I don't know, lessons learned things you've learned along the way, or things you wish you learned, someone told you at the beginning that you've kind of had to learn the hard way, that you would like to impart on any of us who are still learning here?
Yeah, sure. You don't know how a project's going to go when you created a budget in the beginning, so you're relying a lot upon hopefully you've done a kind of similar project before, and you can refer back to that and how much hours you expended on that project and what kind of mix of people at different pay rates. So there's something to be said for doing the same types of projects lots of times. So you build in more predictability. But still, things can still not pan out the way you anticipated. I think as the design progresses through its phases, the amount of possibility that things can go wrong gets smaller and smaller as it gets closer to the end. So I recommend making sure to give yourself more of a cushion early on, and then kind of use that up. And if you have a lot of money still left, and when you're going into CDs, you might feel like you can staff up a little bit more if it's warranted. And then by the time you get the CA, hopefully a lot of the unpredictability has gone away. And we could even take like what we call a budget adjustment, a positive budget adjustment. So you're taking that money and you're kind of taking it out of profit.
I think your microphone's a little bit, it's coming in and out a little bit.
Yeah,
Was there something at some
Oh,
point I can repeat?
That's better. That's much better.
yeah. You're talking about kind of reducing your cushion as you go along, and
Yeah.
I think we especially started losing you when you started talking about CA, I think.
So yeah, by the time you get to CA, hopefully a lot of that unpredictability has gone to a minimum, and you could, if you have extra hours left in your budget at that point or extra dollars, you could take a budget adjustment and take that as profit.
Right?
I have a question. Kyle Barker mentioned, I think overtime is an important part of this discussion. Do you compensate people for overtime? And if so, how?
Question.
I'll add a little context. So I'm Kyle. I put it in the chat because I was very actively eating lunch. Thank
okay.
you for this. Thank you for this
So
great presentation. I think that I've worked at a few places where, like design, I think all of us would feel this way, right? Like getting the project right felt kind of even more important than the hours, right? So sometimes I felt like the hours sort of went to the background in a way that was, I think, troubling as a project manager to like try and keep people accountable. And then I would think like, wow, we're kind of like getting killed on this project in quotes. But then at the end of the project, through doing, having my hands in a bit of more like the kind of high level financial stuff of the firm, would realize like, oh, we were actually okay. But the reason we were okay was because people had worked a lot of overtime that wasn't compensated, which I don't think is like a very sustainable model. And I'm just curious how you all handle that, how overtime's factored into this. I've only worked at, I would say, kind of smaller architecture firms, like under 20. And so, yeah, just curious about other people's perspectives on this.
that's a great question. I can say at some, we don't pay overtime, and our baseline assumption is that people are not doing overtime. Of course, that sometimes, everyone knows you got to do what you got to do to get it done. So I'll say from our perspective, we don't bake it into like the plan, right? And I think sometimes it's also a question of like staffing across the entire office and like who we have available, how much of their time we have available for the project. It kind of becomes more of a function of that, I feel like, for us at least, than like a budget choice, I guess. But I'm curious what other people.
Yeah, for full-time employees, we don't pay overtime.
Yeah, your microphone's coming out.
Fading out again, Matt. Can't hear you, Matt.
You cannot hear me?
Oh, now it's better.
Now we can.
Just don't move.
Yeah.
I'll take my video off, maybe. So we for full-time employees, we don't pay overtime, but we do allow flexibility in the amount that you work. So if you're working towards a deadline, you're working a lot of hours because it needs to get done, We have some flexibility about people taking some time off after that. It's not always like one-to-one, but
No.
Yeah, you're
It's
still
all
fading
about-
out.
Yep.
okay.
I think what he's saying is that it like you do kind of a bit of flex time, right? Like if people are doing overtime leading up to a deadline, they then have the flexibility to take some time after that deadline to kind of make up for it. Is that Tracy? I don't know if you can verify that. Matt, you sound like you're nodding. Yeah.
And
Like
also to what Matt was saying previously, is that when we build a budget, we try to put on a little bit of contingency for the hours, just in case they do happen to go over. So there is always that little buffer that helps when needed. So we have about 12 minutes left, and I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else, but we just had another question come up from Meryl about, I'm curious what software firms use to manage the time and budget, if it's integrated with timesheets or it's separate Excel tracker. I can certainly speak to that. We use BST is an accounting software that we use that integrates both of those things. And it was specifically geared towards architects. It's very, I don't want to say complicated, but there are a lot of, it's very intense. I think is the right word. There's a lot of different components to it that have been really helpful to us on the accounting side. So typically I would enter the budget exactly how it's given to me, and then we gather, BST allows me to generate reports using that data. As I mentioned, for different types of things, it's not just billing, it could be, you know, the project manager could want to know how many hours at a certain, yeah,
Oh, we're getting some sorry, I think David, we're getting some feedback from you, so I should muted you. I'm sorry. Tracy, if you want to go ahead and finish your thought, and David, I'm guessing you unmuted because you wanted
no,
to.
I just, so as far as the software, we use BST and we're still learning. And we find that it is a really good tool. And again, for reporting and keeping track of all sorts of data is really helpful. We do use Excel spreadsheets for one of the things Matt was talking about, as far as looking at the different projects, what hours were budgeted per phase, what we ended up using, what the square footage was, what the fee was for feasibility and schematic design, and then what the overall fee was. So that gives a really good historical measure when looking at different types of projects as well. But we have one more quick question from Kelsey about how much contingency time do you buffer in as a rule of thumb? Is there a standard multiplier for baseline assumptions?
Good question.
I think we do 10%, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, Matt, I'm curious, do you have a rule of thumb that you use? Or?
If you can hear me,
Yep.
it varies depending on the project. 10% would be great, but not always possible. So at each phase, we, you know, maybe 5% is a good target to have. And that allows you some flexibility as things go wrong as well.
Yeah. And I'll just add to the question about what software we use at some Jira, just from Deltek, I think. They offer several different kind of softwares, and similarly, it does timesheets, and like we do our invoicing through it. We do staffing projections, both kind of shorter term and longer term. We do invoicing projections with it now, so it's pretty similar, Tracy. I feel like kind of elaborate. Luckily, we have a couple people in our office who have really gotten very technical with how to like set up custom reports and different things for everyone to make it a little bit more manageable for like the day-to-day project manager to do things. But it's really, I will say, we had been doing like invoicing and staffing projections more sort of manually in spreadsheets, everyone separately, and then it all fed into like an office-wide spreadsheet. And this has really streamlined that quite a bit. which has been really nice. So
Yeah, I know there are different types of software out there. Kyle just said they use Monograph, and I think it's,
oh yeah, I've heard of that one.
I think it depends on the size of your company.
Yeah.
What type of modules you're looking for, and really how it gears up for the types of reports you want and the different types of things you want to keep track of.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those like I feel like anything with Excel and whatnot, it's like garbage in, garbage out too. So as the more disciplined you are about what you put in there, the more useful it is. But let's see, do we have a couple more? Just getting caught up in the chat here. Oh yeah, Monograph. Okay.
Well, I think we're just about getting ready to wrap it up, as Rosalind said. If anybody has any more questions, or we know this is being recorded and it'll be up on the BSA website, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. So, feel free to have another look, and obviously you can always reach out and ask any questions. And we really want to thank everybody for being here, and for those who participated, we thank you as well. And we hope everyone has a really great afternoon. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.